Jamie, you all set to record? Pardon me, Katie, you all set to record?
Yes, sir.
Recording in progress.
Good evening. My name is Peter Basserman, Chairman of the Branford Inland Wetland Commission. I'll now open the Commission's regular monthly meeting of January 23rd, 2025. It is now 7 o'clock. This evening's meeting will be conducted as a virtual meeting using the Zoom software platform, being held in accordance with Connecticut Public Act 22-3. And the documents referred to during the meeting are available at the town hall or on the agency's website. Final agenda for tonight's meeting was filed on January 21st and is also posted on the town's website. Does staff have any changes to this evening's agenda?
No.
Since the meeting this evening is a public meeting and maybe the first time for some in terms of attending, I have some opening remarks. First, to provide public exposure to the meeting, BCTV is recording this evening. We are thankful for their participation, and this allows the public to view this recording at a later date. Participants, please be conscious of the fact that you are being recorded and your face needs to be visible on the screen, especially when speaking. To ensure a complete and accurate record, please, each time a comment is made, indicate your name so that the appropriate comments can be identified. Those wishing to participate, use the raise your hand feature. Staff will make sure that we recognize those in the appropriate manner. Once the meeting has begun, mute your microphone if you're not speaking. As a reminder, any participant that needs to leave during the meeting, please indicate such so that we can determine who was on the call when various items were discussed. And if a commissioner needs to recuse themselves, please blank the screen, go dark, so there's no confusion as to who participated and who didn't. I'll take a roll call now of the commissioners. Commissioner Gokowski.
Commissioner Gokowski, present.
Commissioner Begeman.
Commissioner Begeman, present.
Commissioner Armrod.
Commissioner Armrod, present.
Commissioner Boda.
Commissioner Boda, present.
Commissioner Papantonis.
Commissioner Papantonis, present.
And we have with us staff, Jamie Ann Frederick.
Present, although my video will not be working tonight, apparently.
Okay. And Katie Blanchett.
Present. My video is working tonight, so.
1 out of 2. Okay. At this point, looks like we have a quorum. All commissioners present can participate in the deliberation this evening. And we have up to 7 commissioners that can vote on an issue. So we are good to go. Is there any commissioner that feels that they need to recuse themselves from any of the items on the agenda this evening?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Armrod. I will remain recused from all matters regarding Beacon Hill Road. That is, let's see, item 2A and 3A on tonight's agenda.
Thank you. Duly noted. Anybody else? We still have a quorum for all items on the agenda this evening. Let's see. First up, we have the approval of minutes of January 9th, 2025, which is a regular meeting of the commission.
This is Commissioner Begeman. I have some comments on the minutes. I'm not making a proposal that or a motion that we approve them. So I note, can I just should I go through them?
It would be good because we've gone through this before and then had an amendment and approved them at the following meeting. So let's get that on the record.
Inland Wetland Associate Katie Blanchett, just make sure you go slowly so I can accurately document everything. so I can
Okay.
make the proposed changes. Thank you.
So on page 2 of the minutes, somewhere, I mean, some of the things are captured in the minutes and some aren't. And one of the things that I thought was important to capture in the minutes was that George Logan thought that July and August would be the best time for excavation of the wetland area. With the Phragmites removal, because it would be least likely to disturb the wild, or the time that would least, for the least disturbance of wildlife.
Noted.
Okay. This is a question. I wasn't sure whether the same thing was done for the time for blasting. I don't know if we had a time that was stated during the meeting for when would be best for wildlife for blasting.
He didn't specify a timeline. He said that they would time it so that nesting birds would not be disturbed. But he didn't give, like, you know, mid-November or mid-October. He just said so that nesting birds weren't or as least disturbed as possible. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's important to note that in the written minutes. It's hard. Some things get written down, some things don't. So I was just trying to think of the things that I would want.
That's fine. I can include that. No problem.
Okay. And the third thing had to do with about halfway down the page, the discussion on slopes and retaining walls, along with other design elements such as the pickleball court. And I just want to put in there that the question was whether that surface was pervious or impervious. And I don't believe we got an answer. I think that Mr. Georgina said that he wasn't sure how it had been stated. So
He said that he calculated it as impervious.
Impervious.
okay,
Yeah, Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. As I recall, he wasn't sure what the surface would actually be, but for stormwater calculations, he calculated it as though it would be impervious.
okay. Further down, just a minor correction. Jamie Flynn is the past president of Friends of the Farm River Estuary, so I wanted to make sure that that was corrected. And then one last thing, which is in the Cherry Hill Road, 175 Cherry Hill Road, under enforcement on page 3. About halfway through that paragraph, Mr. Georgina indicated they had not had a chance to do that document. And I don't think it's written in here. And I thought that we had decided that he was going to submit that document to the inland wetlands agent. So I thought that that should be noted.
Also noted. Sorry, I was writing.
That's okay.
Is that it, Commissioner Begerman?
Mr. Begman, that's it.
Does any commissioner have any issues with those changes? All right. Why don't we table then the approval of the minutes of January 9th until the next regularly scheduled meeting? Okay. I'll now open the deliberations for Inland Wetland 240902. As a recap, 9/26 of 24, regular meeting of the Branford Inland Wetland Commission. Commission voted to open a public hearing on the application as it was determined that the proposal planned a disturbance of the wetland on site in excess of 5,000 square feet. The date of 11/14 was established to open the public hearing. CLA Engineers was engaged in October to assist this commission in the review of the application. At the November 14th meeting, the commission agreed to continue the public hearing until December 12th, 2024. Discussion was not concluded at the December meeting, and so parties agreed to continue the public hearing until January 9th of this year, 2025. On that date, additional material was discussed and the public hearing was then closed. To that point, since the public hearing is now closed, no new evidence can be added to the record that's already been established. Evidence needs to be evaluated and is restricted to that which is included on the exhibit list. And we've had a number of exhibit lists, and the one that's, I believe, in play today is dated January 9th of 2025. No additional comments either from the applicant or the public will be allowed. Commissioners that are seated for the application are required to be fair and independent, not predisposed to any outcome. Commission must decide the merit of the application from the facts as they appear on the record, from their own personal observation and technical expertise, and from the expertise of outside consultants hired to assist the commission in assessing the application. Permit decisions must be concluded within timeframes specified by Connecticut statutes and our regulations. It's been the practice of this commission, when the submitted application resulted in a public hearing, that the commission review the criteria laid out in section 10.2 of our regulations as a guide for the assessment, identifying particular areas for discussion and provide recommendations to staff to prepare a document so that the commission can vote on the recommendations at a date to be determined. And to that point regarding the date, Jamie, can you just refresh us on the timeframes associated with 240902?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So after the public hearing is closed, the commission has 35 days to make a decision. Unfortunately, our next meeting is 36 days. So to continue deliberations, the commission would need to schedule a special meeting. I would tentatively recommend February 6th, as it's a Thursday, and it should provide enough time for staff to draft something and have it looked at by town council. But open to other suggestions and recommendations if that date doesn't work for commissioners.
How does that date look? Does anybody have issue with the February 6th date?
No.
Commissioner Begman, I won't be able to attend.
Anyone?
So then maybe we want to look at another date. I think we would theoretically still have a quorum if everyone else was able to attend.
Well, why don't we go forward with that as a date that we would review and see how the discussion goes this evening and whether we need to revisit that at the end of the meeting, unless somebody wants to suggest something different at this point.
This is Commissioner Boda. Just first one comment. I did watch the video of the last 15 minutes from the previous meeting, so I'm caught up. Is there no opportunity to ask the applicant for the extension to the meeting on the 13th?
That is another possibility. If the commission would like to request an extension, we do have time available should the applicant be willing to grant that extension.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, you know, if we have a meeting on the 13th and we have a meeting on the 27th, you would be hard pressed to get me to a third meeting in the month, even if it's a short one.
Okay, with that as an overhang, why don't we go forward with the discussion this evening regarding what's in front of us and we'll revisit the timing as the evening moves on. So I guess we have two opportunities for date. One is to ask an extension, and the other is to have the meeting as a special meeting. We might be cutting it a little thin with membership at that point. Okay.
This is Commissioner Begman. Just a question on counting. January 9th, we're talking about January 9th through to February 13th. Isn't that 35 days? I'm just looking at my calendar and trying to, looks like
I have a fancy little spinner calendar and it says it's 36 days.
Okay. It's exactly 5 weeks. Isn't 5 weeks 35 days? Is something wrong with my math?
There's also the question of whether you count the first and the last day. I don't know
Okay.
that we want
Okay.
to put ourselves in that boat.
This is Commissioner Papantonis. Legally, you don't count the day. January 9th doesn't count. You start counting on the 10th. Like in court, they would count this on the 10th.
Yeah, let's not put ourselves against the wall for the sake of a day. Either get an extension or have the meeting, but let's.
I mean, this could be easily resolved potentially if the applicant's willing to grant an extension. Does the commission want to ask the applicant if they're willing to grant that extension to the February 13th meeting? That way and then you make your decisions from there.
Commissioner Papantonis, I don't think we need one, but it's probably prudent if the commission wants to do so. I think town council would tell you to count it the way I did, but if the applicant's here, let's ask him now.
Doug Anderson for Beacon Hill LLC. So you just explained to me, you guys, what's that timing? What's the delta in the timing on that? Is it just a week before versus a week after? Is that what we're asking?
So the question is whether we have enough time, debatably, to continue to the February 13th meeting, or if we would have to have a special meeting by February 12th. So the delta time difference would be 1 day, conceivably, in what the commission could schedule versus what they're requesting.
Yeah, listen, that's fine. I mean, if it's a day, that's really irrelevant at this point. So if it has to go to the next meeting, then and that meets the timeline, then yeah, then we're in agreement with that.
Okay.
I'm sure
Thank you for that.
Appreciates that, and if you could just send me an email confirming that, that would be much appreciated.
Yep, I'll do that right now.
Commissioner Papantonis, I just want to point out that February 12th is a state holiday also, which makes it not usually count, but I think
I don't
the
think
applicant
that factors in, but I mean, yeah.
Okay. So at least at this point, we can kind of move forward with the idea that there's no need for a special meeting, and we can conduct our deliberations this evening and hopefully get a document prepared so that we can render decision on our next regularly scheduled meeting of the commission. Now, in my comments, looks like 10.2 is probably a good guidance document for us to review this application and meet the regulations that we have in town. Does anybody have any other area in our regulations that they feel we need to review other than 10.2 this evening? Okay.
Amy Frederick, an agent. I'll just point out that the commission did hold a public hearing based on the finding that there may be a significant impact. So you'll probably also want to review section 10.3 in regards to the associated required finding. But I think it makes sense to start with 10.2 and work our way through. If the commission would like, I can screen share the regulations as we walk through them. And then, of course, we can backtrack, and if there's anything that commissioners feel didn't get addressed through those items, we can approach.
This Commissioner Papantonis, we had some issues with 7.10, was it? 7.9? I can't remember now. That we might want to look at some point.
Yeah, that might factor into some of the criteria that come up in 10.2. So, and possibly even 10.3. So I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You're going to go ahead and screen share, Jamie?
All right. Do we want to start with section 7 or section 10?
Let me see. Was 7 point what? 7.10?
Was it the compliance with the mitigation requirements that you were referencing, Commissioner Papantonis?
Yes.
So we'll start there.
And then we'll 9, what was 7.9, 7.10, something like somewhere around there.
Seven 9.
Section 7.9 is the mitigation requirement. Essentially, if you're going to be directly impacting 750 square feet or more of wetlands or watercourses, you have to provide mitigation in a 2-to-1 ratio, which cannot be reduced to less than a 1-to-1 ratio. So there was a lot of questions back and forth about that, and the applicant did modify their mitigation areas. Essentially, the final numbers came out as a total impact of 9,673 square feet of impact, including both temporary and permanent. And they're proposing 19,063 square feet of wetland enhancement, restoration, and creation. So they do meet the 2-to-1 requirement. A little bit of rounding involved, but they do meet that 2-to-1 requirement.
This is Commissioner Goklowski. I don't remember what the temporary disturbance was going to be. Was that put anywhere? Did I miss it?
1 minute, let me pull up the site plans. Okay. So the orange areas are the areas of permanent impact where the wetland will not be restored. The blue kind of hashed area is the temporary impact areas that they're proposing to enhance. The green areas are the creation areas. And then they have another enhancement area that isn't related to any site work per se, not necessarily, because the blue hashed areas are related to some of the grading that they're proposing to do. And then this purple area is strictly in proposed enhancement of the existing wetland area.
So they're increasing the wetlands quite significantly then.
They're creating 8,704 square feet of wetlands, and the total permanent impact of wetlands lost is 3,818.
3-1. Okay, thank you, Jamie.
So, this is Commissioner Bassman. Jamie, can you put that colored section of the map that you got on the screen there? Yeah. So if we look at the 19063, what colors represent that 19063?
Okay, mitigation areas, that's going to be purple, blue, and green.
Yeah.
And we've got more green and blue over here. The blue coincides with both impact and mitigation.
And what, unmitigated, okay. And the only shaded area on the blue, which is the grading, is where building 4 is.
I'll jump down to the grading plan real quick. So here you can see that in this area of where the blue area is temporary impact and enhancement, they're proposing to alter the grade in the area of the blue section, but not the purple section. And if I scroll over to the other side, you'll see the same thing. They're regrading so that the basin and surrounding areas are graded kind of uniformly to convey water.
Gotcha, okay. So we go back to what, this is Commissioner Bass, we go back to 7.9A, and they get a check mark for having met the 2-to-1 requirement.
Ultimately, that's up to the commission to determine, but I think that they have demonstrated, an attempt to create the best 2-to-1 mitigation that they can, given particularly where they were starting with the application when it was first submitted. And I do think that the numbers we have now are reflective with past practice. And they do have, so it says compensation measures should be considered in the following order of priority. 1, restore pre-existing wetland or water course, which is something that they've looked to do. 2, enhance degraded wetland or water course to improve functions and values they provide. And 3, create productive wetlands or water course resources. And those 3 criteria and their order come directly from the state statutes. So I think that they took that into consideration in their proposal.
Mm-hmm. And does it follow, this Commissioner Basserman, does it follow that 7.9B, since everything is on site, that they have demonstrated having met 7.9B?
Yeah.
Right. This is Commissioner Basserman. Jamie, when it says habitat in 7.9C, are we talking about plants in this case?
Plants would be part of habitat, but they're not the entirety. I think that a lot of the mitigation areas they're proposing lend more to 2, where they're looking to enhance impacted areas. And then I guess it 1 function, so the temporary impact or the permanent impact, the northern extent of the southern wetland, they're proposing a mitigation area that would be part of the stormwater conveyance from the northern wetland to the southern wetland. So that would be function. I'm not so sure about like habitat being terribly applicable in this particular instance.
Right. Okay.
This is Commissioner Papantonis. I have a question about going back to 2, because we are within the watershed, right? So even though if the property is self-contained, don't we still have to consider the watershed?
is Commissioner Basserman, but all of their mitigation work is being done within the application site that they have before us. They're not going outside the boundary of the site, are they?
Yeah, no, it's all within the same site. And then probably the best place to look at the watershed. So on the left, yes, the left you have the existing watershed, and on the right you have the proposed watershed. So, for the most part, the water draining ultimately through the site, it is conveying the same way. There's a little bit of difference in the northeast portion of the site as far as what would convey out to Rose Hill Road. But the water flow through the site is maintaining, by and large, very similar drainage patterns. There's breaking it up into smaller areas because of the stormwater system, kind of bisecting and conveying the stormwater in the central portion of the site.
This is Commissioner Basserman. Jimmy, back to C. If the wetland that we were dealing with was not so compromised and it was a functioning wetland, is that more likely where C1 would apply?
Well, again, I think there's two separate pieces to one. There's habitat and function.
And function,
And
yeah.
so let me.
This is Commissioner Basserman. Is this Exhibit 8?
This is Exhibit 8, yes. Yeah, so this is a
Yeah.
summary of the functions and values. So you can see, so P indicates that it's a primary function, yet Y indicates it's a secondary function or a function that is present, and N is the function is not appreciably present or that it's absent. So it does identify wildlife habitat as a function. Aquatic habitat is not identified as a function. And there was discussion about impacts to wildlife at the last meeting. And it was expressed that a lot of that impact should be temporary in nature and could be theoretically minimized during construction through proper oversight. As far as like for like habitat, I guess my thought is particularly with the enhancement area in the northern wetland, they're looking to excavate to essentially hopefully remove the Phragmites population and establish more of a flooded area, which would change the habitat type. So it's not that they're removing habitat, but it's not really like for like habitat. Arguably, some of the creation they're doing on the edges of the wetland might be considered more like for like. So I don't think that the focus of their mitigation was like for like habitat per se. But
Yep. Okay.
yeah, and I do think they were looking to keep some of these functions available, though. If not necessarily maintaining the same habitat, maintaining the functions that the wetland areas provide.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Commissioner Bassman, anybody else have issues with 7(9)A through D? Can we move on to 7(10)? This is Commissioner Basserman. Jamie, in 7(10), where he talks about a management plan, is that a self-contained document, or do you have to go across a number of different exhibits to, if you will, form that management plan?
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. So specifically for the mitigation areas, I think that's by and large in the mitigation plan exhibits. A little bit maybe in the assessment report we were just looking at. There are other management documents that the commission generally looks at overall, like stormwater management and to some extent landscape management as it relates to wetlands and watercourses. And there was discussion at the last meeting about perhaps, that there should be some sort of documentation that should be included in the documentation of the association responsible for the property long term, and that version of the documentation should be provided for the commission to review and make sure that it's satisfactory with your expectations. So I think that a lot of the documentation we have from a wetland standpoint is focused on the initial monitoring phase. And I guess it kind of depends on, whether you're specifically looking at the mitigation or overall maintenance of the property.
And this may be apples and pears, but Commissioner Basserman, apples and pears, but the experience that we had with another large tract off Gould Lane, we're not in a kind of a steady state situation then for that project. And it looks like this project, I think the comment was 3.5 years in duration for this project to complete. And so it's a kind of a changing panorama. And are we able to monitor the activities that we're supposed to be looking at over the course of that period of time regarding erosion and sedimentation controls and how we're managing the invasives, et cetera? And I guess, is it clear as they go through these different phases that we're going to be able to monitor the performance over that period of time?
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. So the monitoring of the mitigation areas, which would include invasive species management, is set to 5 years. And if per standard language the commission uses, if they're not meeting the success standards, then the commission has the option to extend that period to help ensure that that those success standards are met. So that's kind of an incentive to make sure that they are putting the work in up front, because that's when it's most important. And then from an erosion control standpoint, this project certainly is of the scale where it would be typical for the commission to require weekly E&S reports. I would certainly recommend it given the amount of
Yeah.
work, the amount of site that's potentially going to be open at one continuous time, and how close all of the activity is to the wetland areas. And I believe that based on the area of disturbance being over 5 acres, that that will also be a requirement of a general permit.
This is Commissioner Gokowski. Jamie, I'm not confused, but I'm a little bewildered. You're saying that the clock starts ticking from the time we issue the approval for, let's say, monitoring for 5 years?
No. Okay, so the erosion control reports would start from when they start site work. So once they start disturbing the ground, that's when their reports would start for the erosion controls. And then for the monitoring, it starts arguably when they plant.
But when does the 5 year kick into play? Does it kick in after a certificate of occupancy is issued on the property?
Nope. So it has nothing to do with the certificate of occupancy. So let's see if the first year of monitoring shall be the first year that the compensation areas have been through a full growing season after completion of planting. So that basically, a growing season shall start no later than March 31st. So if they plant after March 31st, it would be the following year. That would be year 1. And then they would do 2 reports that first year and then 1 report years 2 through 5.
But if this project is going to go for 3.5 years, and they're going to be doing some disturbance, they're not going to be, the plantings that are supposed to take place probably won't really take place until the final phase of the construction is completed on the property or the site work is completed.
So per their phased plan, they are proposing to start by creating the site access.
Okay.
There's currently a site access. They're looking to establish the permanent site access. That's phase 1 and kind of getting some rough grading and staging areas developed. And then phase 2, before they do any building construction, is to do the mitigation areas, to grade out the basin and construct the mitigation areas. And it specifically calls out in the project narrative. Phase 2 has one major consideration for timing, as phase 2 involves the construction of the land bridge, stormwater basin, and wetland areas within the existing valley. This phase should be undertaken during Connecticut's dry season, as this will minimize the potential for major storm interactions and allow for fall wetland planting and late season grass establishment. So their construction sequence calls for this to be as close to the front of the project as is really kind of feasible. And I think that it's important that, this is what they're saying they're going to do, and this is how the commission would expect it to be implemented, right? So any deviation from that would be a deviation from the permit and would require the commission's review and approval. And, there's nothing to say the commission would be okay with that being changed. That would have to be a request, and the commission would have to determine whether that could be a modification or if that would require a new permit. So what the commission's being asked to approve through this application would have the mitigation areas established before any of the buildings were even starting to be constructed. So it would be, so say they do the mitigation and then they have like another 3 years of construction, they would have monitoring reports going on through that construction period, and then they would likely still have a year or 2 based on the time frame outlined, where they would be doing reports potentially once site work is done.
Okay. This is Commissioner Goklowski. Am I able to ask Doug Anderson a question?
No.
No.
Okay.
Jamie, this is Commissioner Bass, Jamie, in terms of the mitigation work, I mean, this is not too dissimilar from what we, experienced with the Gould Lane project. How often would you be getting monitoring reports on the mitigation performance while construction was going on the rest of the site with buildings and such?
All right. Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So I don't want to get too much into specific projects and comparisons, but I don't believe that the phasing of that project had the mitigation up front like this one does. So that's just a point of kind of apples and oranges. So typically it would be 6 months after planting, then a year annually through the 5 years. At the last meeting, I believe, and or the meeting before that, we were talking a bit about monitoring and the fact that I believe George Logan had indicated that during the creation period, the construction of the mitigation areas, he could provide weekly updates of where they are, anticipated timeframes for completion. Maybe they aren't going to be able to do some of the herbaceous plugs in the fall and they have to wait until the spring. All of that would be communicated. So that is something the commission could look to codify. If you thought that was.
This Commissioner Bass, he certainly, I think, represented the fact that hands-on visibility, consciousness, if you will, during the actual execution of the plan is fundamental to the success. I have no issue with that, and whether it's weekly reports or not, we certainly should, monitor that. My concern is with the mitigation work being done and then multitude of construction activities taking place after that. I'm not sure I want to wait 6 months at a time to see what's happened to that mitigation area while the plan is being executed. It's not like we put a mitigation plan in and then leave it alone and watch what happens, because there's activity on the site.
This is Commissioner Bodo.
From my standpoint, go ahead.
We had discussed at the last meeting the need, the idea for at the outset of that mitigation work, that there be a meeting with Jamie and the environmental person, whether that's Mr. Logan or somebody else, to at that time, based on when it is in the year and other factors, that they kind of scope out some benchmarks for when things were going to happen and some of the details that we can't necessarily hash out right now without knowing starting dates, and then to keep the wetland office apprised based on those dates, and certainly more regularly if necessary. So I think that is certainly, some of it is within the minutes, but we did discuss it as a potential condition for approval.
This Commissioner Bass, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how much detail we have to get into so that Jamie can prepare something that we would look at subsequently and be able to vote on it.
This is Commissioner Boda. I think that piece would be a detail that we would include within a condition of approval, which is And again, we can maybe look back at the minutes from that portion of the meeting. It's because it's already stated some of that conversation, and that's certainly something that we would want to incorporate in our language, because it was something that we wasn't necessarily it was not part of the original plan, but rather an additional detail as we started talking about the creation of the wetland area.
This is Commissioner Bassamy. I have no problem with that recollection, but my concern was that was concentrating on the actual execution of the mitigation activity. You know, the plugs and all of the associated activity associated with creating the wetland and then monitoring its success. I guess I would think that the monitoring during the early stages of that work would be more frequent than a year or a year and a half afterwards. And so it was, what's the specificity of how long do we want to get, face-to-face meetings, weekly or monthly reports versus quarterly reports? And did we need to debate that tonight, or is that something that staff can do as they prepare the document for us to review at the subsequent meeting?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. I mean, I think that's something that the developers should be doing. They should be having their wetland professional out there monitoring it on a routine basis. I am not aware of a past practice where we've required reports more frequently. It's not to say that it necessarily. So I think the big thing is knowing when they're about to start the mitigation, having that pre-construction meeting prior to the start of mitigation, having this wetland professional that's going to be out there overseeing the work present, having the guy overseeing the machinery that's going to be out there present. So that way we can all make sure everyone's on the same page, getting kind of a rough punch list of when certain benchmarks will be met. And maybe and I think at that point, maybe establishing check-in time. So say they are planting in the fall, then there's going to need to be another check-in in the spring when they finish the plantings. I don't know that we need reports in between about the mitigation areas, because theoretically that's going to be behind the scenes. One thing I can think of that you might want to codify would be if, for whatever reason, the erosion ENS report indicates that there was a breach and the wetland area may have been impacted, then we probably want the soil scientists to go out there and see if they have any specific recommendations to address that. Otherwise, I'd be open to suggestions because I'm not sure what else to recommend.
This is Commissioner Basserman. So, Jamie, you're saying that you would take our normal approach during the establishment of the mitigation area, and then once that work has been deemed complete, we would go to a 6-month or annual report?
Yes and no. So I do think we would kind of. So, I mean, I think that it would be a good idea to have the soil scientists provide updates, much like we do have the erosion control professional provide updates when the site's being developed. It makes sense for the wetland scientist to provide updates while the mitigation work's being completed. So I do think having an update of work completed and work scheduled would be potentially a good thing to add. And I think that was discussed at the last meeting. So I don't think it would be blindsiding anybody. And I think it's helpful for all parties to know where things stand. And, that way we're not going backwards down the line. So I guess I'm saying I would keep it mostly the same, but have a little bit more check-in benchmark at the beginning of the project than we typically have had in the past.
Okay.
This is Commissioner Boda. I just wanted to say I agree. I think that's what we discussed at the last meeting, and I think that made sense in terms of a plan. One, like Jamie said, so that the developer, they're already aware. Obviously, we've had this conversation, but two, we give ourselves a little bit more protection from unanticipated consequences that weren't being monitored and intentionally reported on.
Does that cover 710, or are there specific elements in 710 that we still need to talk about? The bond is item D.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So I'll just throw in real quick. This is definitely of the scale where the commission would require a bond, usually for erosion control measures and the implementation of the mitigation. I think that the commission wants to consider the items required for the mitigation bond to help ensure that, the whole purpose of a bond is if it's not done properly, that the commission can ensure it gets done properly. So you want to make sure you're bonding for the appropriate items to be able to achieve that. So my recommendation would be to include the plantings, the monitoring, invasive species control, and the site work, the excavation, and potential import / soil amendments. Because if you don't have the bond for the site work, it doesn't really matter if you have the bond for the plantings, because you're not going to have the proper hydrology and soil medium to put them in. The regulations do allow for a surety for non-erosion control measures. So yeah.
Amy said, Commissioner Bodie said the plantings, the monitoring, the soil amendment, and the machinery.
Excavation. And I don't know if you have invasive species management in there. I think I said monitoring, but management.
Yeah.
This is Commissioner Bassett. Jamie, item D talks about a 2-year time frame.
We're looking at the regs?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, so I don't think that's terribly relevant at this time. Essentially, the way that we phrase our conditions is that the applicant has to submit an itemized estimate for the items to be bonded. And this is basically saying that once they've submitted that estimate, it's good for 2 years. So if they submit an estimate and they don't start the job, and then 5 years later they say we're good to go, we would request a new estimate.
Okay.
Based on market pricing. Essentially, like if they had submitted the bond, a bond estimate back in 2009 for that previous permit
Right.
that's in place, it would not mean much in today's dollars.
So the piece of paper is good for 2 years, but the bond could be extended clearly.
Yeah,
different time
and once they've started work, the bond is the bond amount. So, it doesn't matter how long they take once they've started. That 2 years is just for the initial establishment
Okay.
of the bond.
Yep.
if you will.
Got it.
Not to say halfway through the project, they have to reassess their bond amount.
And this Commissioner Bassler, this would include it as a condition of approval?
Yeah, I would recommend that as a condition of approval.
Mhm. Okay. Anything else on section 7? Time to turn to 10.2.
So essentially, criteria for this decision. Agency shall take into consideration all the relevant facts and circumstances, including but not limited to A, the environmental impact of the proposed regulated activity on wetlands and water courses. So if it would be helpful for this discussion, I can pull up the site plan that shows the impacts, both temporary, permanent, and proposed mitigation areas. Go to the and then there's also the environmental assessment report. If you want me to pull that up for any reference, let me know. It speaks to kind of the existing and historical conditions of the site relative to the current and proposed.
This is Commissioner Besserman. I guess in looking at 10.2A, other than the filling of the wetlands, what other environmental impacts are there on the site?
Relative to wetlands and water courses.
Relative to wetlands and water courses, yeah.
Due to the grading and drainage changes, there's some changes in how the water is being conveyed. But as we were looking at earlier, the general conveyance.
Yeah. Say Same.
areas are being maintained.
And this Commissioner Bassman, even though it's changed, I don't know that there's any evidence on the record that says that there's a negative consequence to those changes in direction, flow, velocity, etc.
Yeah, I would also just point out 10.2A doesn't specify positive or negative.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So if we have filling of wetlands as kind of the focus of attention here, that leads right into 10.2B. Is there consideration for a feasible and prudent alternative to the plan that has less environmental impact? Is there anything on the record that we can point to? We tried, this is Commissioner Batson, we tried moving buildings, we tried separating buildings, changing the cul-de-sac to a T or an L, I can't remember. But I'm not sure on the record that anything stuck.
This is Commissioner Papantonis. We had a lot of discussion about Building 4. Commissioner Begum in particular, I think, asked a lot of questions about that building. And I guess my question is, are we required to approve this plan as it's proposed, or are we able to approve it, for example, just as a hypothetical, like without Building 4, which was a big concern for us?
I think it's
Commissioner
very
Bassman,
problematic.
I believe they said about Building 4, this is a no-go.
I think it would be problematic also from the vantage point that you don't have an alternative grading plan in place, or erosion control plan, or even to that end, mitigation plan that would coincide with the potential changes in wetland impact. So to say removal of Building 4 in and of itself leaves a lot of other unanswered questions. I think that would be like an alternative plan that you would request being shown, and or if you really felt that was something you needed to see, if you felt that was a prudent and feasible alternative, then the commission could deny the application on the grounds of prudent and feasible alternative and specify that as a prudent and feasible alternative that you would like to see. So I will jump just real quick, since we're on that topic, to
one moment, Jamie. This is Commissioner Bassman. You just said something I didn't think we could do, because don't we have to, you said deny the application. But
so let me just
we would
read
deny
section.
the application on what grounds?
So this conversation is specifically in regards to the removal of Building 4. I think it would be problematic to approve the permit with a condition that removes Building 4, because you don't have a site plan that shows what that would look like. So my comment is, if that was rising to the point of concern, that say the argument was that the removal of Building 4, Commission finds, is a prudent feasible alternative. Section 10.3 of the regulations states, in the case of an application which received a public hearing pursuant to a finding by the agency that the proposed activity may have a significant impact on wetlands and watercourses, a permit shall not be issued unless the agency finds, on the basis of the record, that a feasible and prudent alternative to the proposed activity does not exist. In making this finding, the agency shall consider the facts and circumstances set forth in subsection 10.2 of this section, and this finding and the reasons therefore shall be stated on the record in writing. And then 10.4, I knew it was somewhere. Okay. 10.4 goes on to say, in the case where an application is denied on the basis of a finding that there may be feasible and prudent alternatives to the proposed regulated activity which has less adverse impact to wetlands or watercourses, the agency shall propose on the record in writing the types of alternatives which the applicant may investigate, provided this subsection shall not be construed to shift the burden from the applicant to prove that he is entitled to the permit or the present alternatives to the proposed regulated activity. So that's my high level comments on building 4. If you have any questions or want to ask me to clarify anything, please let me know.
This is Commissioner Goklowski. All the additional site work for the the wetlands to decrease and add and subtract and add and redo is in the area of building 4, and we had a lot of discussions about that. They've increased the wetland size, more than 2 to 1, which is the regulations. So, and I think if I remember correctly, with this, when they were talking about this proposal, that financially and monetarily, if they removed building 4, it would not be feasible for them to go forward with the project because of the costs involved.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. There has been a lot of discussion about building 4, a lot of alternatives to accommodate the 22 units requested have been discussed. I think it's also kind of important to keep in mind the commission didn't request specifically an alternative that removed building 4. It didn't indicate that as a not to say it's off the table, but I think that's important to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, and we didn't have anything from the peer review that
So the
pointed
peer
us
review
with
comments relative to the prudent and feasible alternative analysis was, let's see, let me pull it up. Don't want to put words in their mouths. So regarding the previous comments, numbers 31, 32, 33, listed below, which are all the alternative analysis, it says the applicant has presented an alternative analysis. The commission can consider whether the applicant has provided sufficient detail to demonstrate that the proposal represents the most feasible and prudent alternative. So I think initially going back, or not initially, but going back in some of the previous CLA comment letters, there were concerns raised about the adequacy of the information provided in regards to prudent and feasible alternatives analysis, and specifically what the Branford regulations require. So my interpretation of this comment is that they felt the missing information, or they felt missing information has been provided, and essentially are leaving it up to the commission to determine whether or not it's appropriate, because prudent and feasible alternative analysis ultimately falls to the commission.
But my point is they didn't have a plan that we could now, with the record closed, point to and say, this is the reason why we're not going forward here, because this alternative to the commission is reasonable. There was nothing proposed.
Well, this is Commissioner Boda. I think that there obviously has been a tremendous amount of conversation about building 4 and the feasibility of removing it. And the applicant brought in quite a discussion around the reason why it is not feasible financially to then bring in sewer to that section of town with the loss of that building, that's their break point. And so, yeah, I don't think that, because what was the other one was their previously approved site plan.
Subdivision.
Yeah.
See if I pick the right one. So yeah, I think that as to really boil down the argument with the 10 lot subdivision is they're arguing they need 22 units now. 10 lots is less than 22, so it's more of a financial burden for that sewer access. I am screen sharing, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And then also, so let's see if I can pull up the right one again. Can I be extra lucky? Okay. No, I can't be. Bear with me 1 minute. All right, so this table shows the proposed application for considerations on the right-hand side and the approved subdivision, which is one of the alternatives we're discussing now, is on the left-hand side. And they're showing the total area of proposed disturbance. There's a slight increase for the current proposal. Wetland disturbance, there's a slight increase. So this wetland disturbance for the subdivision includes the disturbance. This number is smaller if you look at the actual subdivision approval, but this number factors in the additional wetland area that was identified in July. So when you look at that, it brings the wetland disturbance numbers fairly close together. And they're showing that the wetland creation for the proposed application is 19,000, whereas the approved permit is roughly 4,500. So jumping back to the alternatives. So this was one of the alternative site plans they had laid out for the commission. And then the other one was this apartment style development, and ultimately kind of the argument for this one not being feasible or prudent and or feasible is the fact that it likely wouldn't get approval from planning and zoning based on preliminary meetings that they had with the planning and zoning commission.
This is Commissioner Begeman. I think for me, one of the hard things is having not gone through this kind of process in terms of something that's not considered financially like an alternative that isn't financially feasible, of like why like that building 4 is that it seems to me what we're doing is we're taking somebody's word on that, and maybe that's how we do it with the commission. I don't know, but I think that that's part of what's hard, right? Is that a developer saying that it's not financially feasible. We can't do the sewers unless, you know, we have a certain amount of houses. And so maybe that is how we handle things. I don't know, but I think that that's a little bit hard, that there aren't financially, like we weren't given financially an estimate. You know, it's like, here, this is what we expect to make from the buildings. This is what it's going to cost to develop it. If we don't do this house, this is why we can't make any money, or why a sufficient amount of money. I mean, I don't know, you know, the criteria used for that.
This is Commissioner Papantonis.
We didn't put anything on the record that said that you could remove building 4 and get this job done with the sewers. You know, in other words, if we were having this conversation 6 months ago, maybe we would have gotten an expert to be able to weigh in on that. But we're at the point where that didn't happen.
Well, this Commissioner Papantonis, first of all, that, you know, the whole argument, all it was argument about we can't do it unless there's 22 units, because we, as Commissioner Begeman said, we haven't seen any hard numbers. But 6 months ago, they had a different application that they then withdrew, and are piggybacking on the withdrawn application with a new application. And, you know, Building 4 has always been an issue for this commission. We've raised a lot of had a lot of questions about it, and the answer is just, well, we need Building 4, we can't make it work. But we've never seen any hard numbers. Just argument.
This is Commissioner Goklowski. I think in one discussion, I believe the cost, they mentioned something about the cost of the sewer, putting the sewers into the project was over $1 million, like 1.1 or 1.2 million. I remember that number was standing out because it was fairly expensive. And I'm not sure how they're breaking their cost factors down. But if I don't like to take anybody's word for it, but on projects, but when you're building a project and you have site work and you have this and you have that, you also have unexpected other issues that could crop up that they probably won't know about. So there's always contingencies on construction. I think they addressed the issue of Building 4 with the additional enhancement of the wetlands. And I feel comfortable on that end. I wasn't comfortable with it before, but the way it was described and handled, I'm comfortable with it now.
And this is Commissioner Boda. I do think that the inclusion of the sewer system into this plan changes the dynamic of the application in a way that we don't typically see when we're looking at proposal for fill. Because just below 10.2B is C, which is that relationship between short-term and long-term impacts. And while we're looking at a permanent loss of that portion of the wetland, aside from the mitigation, which is more than 2 to 1, you're looking at an overall reduction in nitrogen loading, which is ultimately one of the most significant issues that our water bodies face and our wetlands face. And so I think that the inclusion of the sewer system, not only for this development, but for the adjacent homes on Rose, changes the dynamic when it comes with respect to the fill. And so I don't know. I think that we talked a lot about Building 4 and the prudent and feasible alternatives, and do think that the applicant has put forward a case that this is the application with the least amount of impact, as well as with the addition of the mitigation and, again, that very unique situation where we're have the opportunity to have sewer added. I think that changes the dynamic in this application quite a bit from a wetland impact
Commissioner
standpoint.
Bassman point, this is also not just the potential for sewers to help. We have on the record failures that are occurring, pretty frequently. That's already creating issues. So the sewer addition is also very timely. It's not just failures are happening. Looks like quite frequently.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, would it be helpful for me to read the definition of feasible and prudent for the commissioners, or are you feeling pretty confident on those definitions as defined by the regulations?
This would be out of the statutes you're saying that, Jamie?
This would be out of the commission's regulations.
Yeah, well, aren't we in that
So-
section now?
It's at section 2. So feasible.
Oh, okay. Under the definition, I'm sorry.
Feasible means able
Yeah.
to be constructed or implemented consistent with sound engineering principles. And prudent means economically and otherwise reasonable in light of the social benefits to be derived from the proposed regulated activities provided. Cost may be considered in deciding what is prudent, and further, provided a mere showing of expense will not necessarily mean an alternative is imprudent.
Yeah, again, this is Commissioner Boda, and I've been on this commission a ridiculously long time, and so I think that you would be pretty hard pressed to find an example where I'm amenable to some fill, but I do think that given that relationship between the long term and the short term and the long term impacts, as well as the creation, the development of the sanitary sewer, removing homes in the area from septics and failed septics, as well as the enhancement. I do think that meets the goals of the regulations. I think that when we're looking at our purpose, I do think that this particular in this particular case, even with the fill, we are meeting the goals of these regulations. So I wanted to offer that. So maybe we can move forward, or somebody can disagree.
We can always jump back, and I think moving on to the next one might kind of help continue to frame things for commissioners. So D says irreversible and irrevocable loss of wetland or watercourse resources, which would be caused by the proposed regulated activity, including the extent to which such activity would foreclose the future ability to protect, enhance, or restore such resources, and any mitigation measures which may be considered as a condition of issuing a permit for such activity, including but not limited to measures to 1, prevent or minimize pollution or other environmental damage, 2, maintain or enhance existing environmental quality, or 3, in the following order of priority, restore, enhance, and create productive wetland and watercourse resources. So I'll just quickly recap that. We have gone over that they are proposing mitigation to the 2-to-1 requirement per the regulations. There will be permanent loss of approximately 3,818 square feet of wetland. Of the 19,000 square feet of mitigation, they're proposing to create 8,704 square feet of wetland adjacent to existing wetland resource areas.
Is Mr. Basserman, and I guess regarding D, to me, what allows this project to maybe go forward is the monitoring and the success of this mitigation activity. And so some of the things that we talked about in the previous section need to occur in order to be able to say with 10.2D that we've taken the reasonable precautions to restore the area and enhance the area, I guess, with 2-to-1 mitigation work. But does it go beyond that? I mean, essentially, to continue the thought, essentially, whatever the mitigation plan is what we're hanging our hat on 10.2D.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. I think you could also argue that the stormwater management proposed as part of the project would also factor in. So I think kind of what this section is asking you to look at is what's the long-term it's a kind of expanding on the long-term impacts, if you will, of the activity and how it factors into kind of the no net loss stance that the commission takes regarding wetlands. So are the impacts to the wetlands likely to overall reduce that wetland resource and the functions it provides to the surrounding area? And how are those impacts going to impact the overall quality?
this is Commissioner Bassman. I may be simplifying this way too much, but if we were to look at the record, it was established that the wetland functionality today is less than desirable. And what's also on the record is the fact that the new restored, enhanced wetland area would be of a higher functioning value. I don't know that we have anything that disputes that. Unless, Jamie, you can point me to something either in the peer review or comments made during the discussions, that would suggest, that that's a way too simple assessment.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. I can't recall anything in the record that disputes that. That was certainly a point raised in the wetland assessment report, which was reviewed by the peer review team. Peer review team did have some, questions about the mitigation areas along with the commission early on in the review process. And I think that there was some more consideration provided by the applicant to address those concerns. And the assessment report also includes some of the historic information and kind of, I remember George Logan expressing kind of, I guess what he was indicating was likely the rationale for the creation of the expanded wetland area to the northern wetland, if you will, in relation to the removal of a foundation on the site that was likely holding some of that water back, and the removal of the foundation allowed for that hydrology to expand into adjacent areas. And I think there was concern that they're likely during the site inspection where they were investigating the wetland expansion area, there was remnants of that previous site development on site. And I was out there during that investigation and saw that firsthand. There's still chunks of development material out there.
This is Commissioner Begeman. Can I just ask one question about stormwater and impervious and pervious surfaces? I know they're using, the applicant has shown that they can handle all the runoff from the increase of impervious surfaces. And I was thinking, can't you decrease that by having the pickleball court and the parking area around the pickleball court be pervious? But I don't know if that's something that we can suggest. I mean, their application says they can handle all the impervious, impenetrable surfaces. It's a question.
I mean, I guess can you suggest it standpoint, I think if you threw a condition in that guided them to consider it, but didn't necessarily require it.
Okay.
No harm, no foul. If they can, they can. But I don't know. Yeah, I think from a suggestion standpoint, probably wouldn't be an issue. Yeah. You mean just for the pickleball court? Or you also mean for the parking? Sorry, just trying to go back.
No, just the parking around the mailboxes and the pickleball court. It's all uphill. I mean, it all drains down toward the retention basin. And it just seems to me if you can decrease some of that impervious surface. I,
I don't know. Can you play pickleball on a pervious surface?
I think we established on the record that we didn't know.
Yeah, right. That ball may, only come up 3 inches.
This Commissioner Papantonis, I've never played pickleball. I know it's modeled after tennis, but I've never heard of grass courts for pickleball.
I'm pretty sure that the
clay.
parking areas are conveyed through the stormwater system, but it does look like the pickleball is probably sheet flow. So,
Right.
doesn't have to be pickleball.
Maybe this Commissioner Papantonis, maybe we should suggest they change that to a putting green.
oh, well, then what are they going to put down to maintain the putting
That
green?
was a joke. I'm sorry. Getting punchy.
Don't know that I'd want to be that last unit on the end of building 3.
Yeah.
This is Commissioner Begemon. Is that something that, I had talked about having, bocce or something like that, but isn't that planning and zoning that would deal with those kind of issues? Our issue is just looking at what they've said is going to be there. And as we've done with swimming pool and decks, talk about pervious services as much as possible.
Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate to get into, what type of recreation they're proposing. I think if you had a concern about pervious nature of it and, to the point that it could be addressed, that might be fair game. Again, not requiring it because we don't know if that's feasible.
This is Commissioner Basserman, but didn't he also indicate upon Commissioner Begeman's question that they had considered the impervious surface in the calculations
Yes.
for stormwater management, the retention pond, etc. So it's somewhat of a worst case that they considered in their numbers.
Yeah, they considered worst case scenario in the numbers.
Commissioner Begeman, yes, I understand that. I was just thinking if they can do something to get more water back into the ground in a more natural way, wouldn't we want them to do that? That's my point.
Well, it sounds like requiring it might be a bridge too far. Suggesting it could be incorporated into our final discussion.
Yeah, Commissioner Begeman, I'm happy with that.
What's left on 10.2? We were at D. I don't. This Commissioner Basserman, I don't see a lot of issue with E. F. I think Jamie, you stated that basically water leaving the property is kind of the same old situation as we have today. And F kind of relates to that, right? I'm saying E. I didn't see anything with E that I don't know. I didn't have issue with anything with E, but please feel free if somebody does to raise it now. This is Commissioner Bassman. Jamie, did you see anything in either E or F that you wish to raise for the commission?
Jamie, Frederick, and Llewellyn, you did not specifically. I guess in regards to F, we've kind of already gone over the fact that the proposal would bring sewers to the area. And I think another thing to consider in regards to F is, I know in the prudent and feasible alternative analysis, one of the points the applicant made was that rather than being 10 or 11 individual homeowners, this is going to remain a common development with common ownership and maintenance. And we were talking earlier about those maintenance documents in regards to the proposed regulated activity, which are made inevitable by the proposed regulated activity, having those maintenance documents and the tree, the management areas identified, kind of codifies what's being approved for disturbance on site versus left in a natural state.
This is Commissioner Begemon for F. Again, it has to do with the homeowner's maintenance, but I think we had talked about discussion of the fertilizer for the lawn areas and all, because the water eventually goes into the Farm River, which already has high nitrogen. We talked about trying to keep a low nitrogen and anything else that's considered detrimental to the environment from pesticides, herbicides, etc. So that's the only thing I'm thinking about for F.
So expanding the request essentially to include best management practices, which would reduce impacts from fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. Use and/or impacts from fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides.
This is Commissioner Basserman. Jamie, anything else in 10.2 that you wish to get clarity on from the commission as you're thinking of preparing a document that we would review in February?
I don't think there's anything necessarily specific to 10.2. I think it would be helpful to kind of have some more direction in regards to prudent and feasible alternatives finding, and any potential conditions, potentially assuming, you know, that's the way the commission's leaning, that you would like to see drafted up for consideration. We've already been over a couple. I have a couple things that we could go over based on my notes from the meetings and the various exhibits on record, but I'd kind of like to start with what the commission has. So yeah, nothing more on 10.2 specifically, unless any commissioners have something they wanted to add.
This is Commissioner Begeman. Has nothing to do with 10.2. And I don't know if this is the time, but I wanted to bring up some discrepancy I saw in the mitigation plans and then the letter from Logan on January 9th.
Sure.
That I think need to be clarified for whoever is going to be implementing the projects, and if it gets approved.
I think it's important to know what your concerns are.
Oh, okay. So in the revised mitigation in 33B, I don't know if we need to go to it, but he had talked about a 5% of organic. It's number 3. Seth talks about 5% by weight of organic matter. And then in the letter on January 9th, he mentions 10% organic matter. And I don't know if he's talking about the same area. I thought so, but I thought I should bring that up.
This Commissioner Bassman, was that in the topsoil, Commissioner Begeman?
Commissioner Begeman, he's talking about when you bring in the organic topsoil. But it's for the bottom of the basin of where the new, here.
Right.
And then, can you scroll down a little bit? I think. Is that the end of the letter? I thought there was something more about. Okay. Here in number 2, in terms of some of the soil that might have Phragmites, rhizomes in it, in this one says that it can be used for an amendment to upland topland soil, but in the 33B, says that it can't be used. So I'm trying to.
I think in 33B, it's specific to it can't be used.
Yeah, it's a number 5.
Mitigation areas.
Okay.
I can take a look at that and make sure.
I think that's right, because I think he's talking about it can be used for Commissioner Begmont, it can be used in the upland topsoil area. I just wanted to make sure that I think we all want this to be clear and not have people putting some rhizomes somewhere where they're going to create more Phragmites.
I think that's part why he's saying in lawn areas, because it will be mowed regularly. It won't have the hydrology that favors
Right.
the Phragmites. So it shouldn't be able to establish. Whereas if you use it in the mitigation area, obviously it's gonna
Take
have
over.
some prime conditions for
Yeah.
growing. But I'll double check that.
Thank you.
While we're on that last letter from Rima, I think codifying that the 12 button bush should be added to the plan as a condition of approval makes sense. And that should be done prior to start of site work.
And Jamie, this is Commissioner Brown. This is where I had the note about, and again, I think the language was in the minutes from the last meeting, but where we had talked about the pre-meeting to determine approximate timing for the work schedule and reporting to staff at some interval, perhaps weekly. But that conversation was in association with this 33B. And additionally, this is also where we talked about including IPM and specify the type of fertilizers.
Real quick for clarification, approximate timing for work schedule and reporting to staff, is that specific to the mitigation areas or is that for the project in general?
That was specific for the mitigation area. Not that we can't do it for the other, but this conversation was specific to doing this mitigation work. And additionally, Mr. Logan had indicated that removed material, the frag, was to be solarized. Additionally, if it was noted that during their work period that organisms such as tree frogs were present, that there would be a pause in order for those to move out of the way of work. The work is preferably done in July, August, or the winter.
And Jamie, I have another one. It's Commissioner Begemon, when you're ready.
Okay.
So in 33B, number 12, talks about some minimal topsoil may be needed. And in the letter on July 9th, talks about the minimal thickness of this topsoil litter, number 1. And this is the newly proposed wetland enhancement area associated with the northern wetland. And the minimum thickness of this topsoil will be 8 inches. And yeah, and in number 12, it says some minimal topsoil. Because I think 33B was prepared before some of the thinking of making it deeper and needing organic topsoil to be added. So those should just be in sync.
33B was revised specifically for that modification and in the inclusion of the so this northern wetland enhancement area totaling 4,405 square feet. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that is the deep wetland enhancement area.
Jamie, this is Commissioner Boda. I don't know if it's in that document, but we also discussed the inclusion of some microtopography, and I think Mr. Rima had talked about using arrowhead plants to achieve some of that, as well as Commissioner Begeman was just talking about that the substrate, given the depth, may need to be augmented.
Okay. Yeah, the micro topography was mentioned at the last meeting, and I think it was that I think there's a general reference to it in this document, but we could look to further emphasize that in language that also stresses that all mitigation work shall be overseen by a qualified wetland scientist, and link that in with the timing of the work and the organisms, and pausing all that language.
Yeah, and this is Commissioner Boda. I think that the other thing, as Mr. Rima has mentioned, and the applicant had mentioned, that they don't foresee changing teams. I think that it is worth noting that not just a qualified individual, but that it should be overseen by a qualified individual who has successfully worked on other similar mitigation projects before. So it's nice that somebody has the degree, but they need to have some proof of success.
Commissioner Papantonis, I don't know how we're going to be able to enforce that. I agree with you, but it's a tough thing to enforce.
Well, I mean, this is Commissioner Boda. If they're hiring someone, then in addition to the qualifications, they just would need to have had an example that they have successfully done this. In other words, they're going to hire the new person who's just gotten their degree, but someone who has, because qualification, I mean, I don't know that qualification is simply a degree and some internship work. And this may be a non-issue. They've indicated that they plan to continue to use Mr. Rima, but that's not something that we can enforce. We can't say thou shall use a particular person, but I certainly, we can require certain level of qualification. In this case, qualification means that they've successfully done this before.
This Commissioner Bassman, to Commissioner Papadonis' point. Here's a project that's 3.5 years, mitigations are in the early part of that project. Let's say, 9 months down the road, it's another failure. Where are we at?
Commissioner Begman, I think what Commissioner Boda is saying is that if we ask for someone who has had success in wetland creation and enhancement and restoration, especially the creation part, because I think that's what we're most leery about. At least we've tried to put something in there to raise the bar, to show that we're serious about it being successful. It's one thing that we can think of, right? That somebody is overseeing it who has had success with projects. And whether it fails or not is a different story, but I think it's at least we're putting something in up front to help make it.
I don't disagree. I guess I wonder what the consequence is.
Well, this is Commissioner Boda.
Do we say we tried and that's it?
No, this is Commissioner Boda. Two things. One, I think that that's why we have the bond, so that it's not like, well, it didn't work. And two, I think that the hydrology of this particular area is quite different from the last failure. So while a little bit reticent given our most recent history, I think the hydrology is such that we're looking at an enhancement, which is different than what we saw in the last, with that last wetland creation. But to your question, I think that that's the purpose of the bond, to incentivize the property owner to continue to do what needs to be done to meet the goals of the permit. And I think that's also why we're adding in these conditions around the pre-construction meeting for the mitigation area, as well as benchmarks for when X will be, approximately when X will be done and when it's done by, so that we're not finding out a year later that the proposed wetland area desiccated.
This is Commissioner Gokowski. I'm not really overly concerned about the quality of present or future persons on this project. They've hired some very credible people to do this project and to put this project forward. Do I agree with everything with it? No, but they are qualified, and I'm sure the property owner is not going to bring in somebody that's not qualified to do this, because this is a very expensive project for them to undertake. I mean, this is not $100,000 project. This is, probably $2.5 $3 million project by the time they're done. So,
Commissioner Gokowski, this is Commissioner Boda. I hear what you're saying, and having sat here for what feels like forever, that is not always the case. And so we have often, and I mean, there's another thing on the agenda where you have what's created by an engineer and by an environmental scientist or a soil scientist, and then you have what is implemented on the ground by GCs. And there are often mistakes that then we spend, that live on our docket for 5 years, because what was in the plan was not what was implemented. So we can trust, but we also then must verify and make sure that the right people are overseeing it.
And that's all well and good, but that's why we have a check and balance system that we're going to be monitoring what's going on with this project. I mean, this is a 3.5 year project. There's going to be a lot of monitoring going on. I mean, this is going to be on our docket for a long time. You know, it's going to get postponed and move forward and post and there. It's going to be here for a long time. And personally speaking, I don't have a problem with it being on our docket for that long, because this way we're staying on top of it and knowing what's going on with each little situation with the project. That's all. I mean, as far as quality individuals, I'm sure they're going to bring in quality individuals. And we have to have a certain amount of trust that they're going to follow what they say they're going to do. And if they don't do it, we stop them. That's just what we do. Issue a cease and desist and go on from there. It's not the first time.
This Commissioner Passman, Jamie, Building 4, that was one of the early buildings that they were going to construct once the property has been graded and as such, right? It wasn't the 2, 3, and 4 that were going to be built first?
No, Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So it does kind of circle around to a point that I was hoping would come up this evening. At the last meeting, construction sequence was kind of mentioned, and the building order didn't align with the construction sequence that we have. However, my understanding was that the site work would happen by and large per the construction sequence, but the buildings might not necessarily be built in that order. So phase 1 again is bringing in the road access. Phase 2 is the creation and the mitigation. And then phase 3 is the infrastructure, rough grading, in buildings 1 and 2. And then also the rough grading for the area where buildings 5, 6, and 7 would be. And during that time frame, there's a temporary sediment trap where building 4 is proposed. So building 4 arguably cannot be constructed until at least those upslope buildings have been completed and the associated site work, because otherwise the temporary stormwater management plan doesn't exist. So
to that point, then, we're going to have some time between the creation of that wetland in the mitigation area before, in fact, building 4 becomes a reality.
I would say yes.
Yeah. Okay. This is Commissioner Bassman. Jamie, you had mentioned a little more guidance on feasible and prudent.
So given that the commission had the public hearing with the finding that there may be significant impact, the commission has to make a finding as to whether or not there's prudent and feasible alternatives. Per state statute, the commission shall not approve the permit unless you make a finding that there's no prudent and feasible alternative. And then per the regulations, if you find that there is a prudent and feasible alternative, you need to suggest what that could be and what you would be looking to see should the applicant look to resubmit. So
the reason I guess I raised this, Commissioner Bassman, is, and Commissioner Boda kind of touched on it, you know, when we talked about this half hour or 45 minutes ago, whatever. And that is that this is an improvement regarding the wetlands over the original subdivision plan. And given the fact that that is an improvement, in fact, is this a feasible and prudent application?
So there is standard language that we have for a finding. If the commission would like, I could throw that in the document and then at the next meeting, you can decide if you want to elaborate, modify, what have you, or if you find that that standard language is appropriate.
I mean, there's two elements, right? There is the mitigation element and the sewer impact as to this project. And it's the combination of the two of them that need to be considered as we think of feasible and prudent. And if there's some standard language that we could modify for this particular application, that's probably not a bad thought to get it down, and then at the February meeting, kind of modify it for this particular case.
So, this Commissioner Papantonis, I'm still not convinced that this project without building 4 would be imprudent, and why it wouldn't be a feasible and prudent alternative when you're dividing $1 million, as Commissioner Golkowski had talked about earlier, over 20 units. You're talking about $5,000 a unit, right? Given that direct impact of that particular building to the wetlands, it's just really a hang up, a catching point for me. I'm having a very, very hard time with that. It's just argument that this project doesn't work without those two buildings. I never saw the numbers.
Commissioner Golkowski, Commissioner Papagonis, I don't think that $1 million infrastructure cost is going to be spread over a 20-year period. I believe that the builder has to outlay that money to do the infrastructure for the sewers, set it up, and bring it tie it into the town.
I just want to correct you, Commissioner Golkowski. It's Commissioner Papantonis again. I said over 20 units, not 20 years.
Okay.
So we're talking about 22 units or 20 units and $1 million. It's not a huge number per unit different when you're talking about real estate. All right, that's my position.
But this Commissioner Basserman, but if you follow that thought, then the basis of denial would be what?
Commissioner Papantonis, that the project without building 4 is a reasonable and prudent alternative. That the 20 units as opposed to the 22 units, given what's been proposed.
But we don't, this Commissioner Basserman, we don't have anything on the record that indicates that would be a prudent and feasible alternative.
But we don't have the numbers either because they were never presented. So there's no evidence either way.
Well, there is on the record a statement.
And statement is argument.
Well, we got something to think about. Anything? Oh, I know one question, Jamie, the Commissioner Basserman. The peer review folk had a number of items that they looked at, and the recommendation was consider this as a condition of approval. I assume you'll pick those up from that document.
Yes, so I have them kind of scattered throughout my notes, but Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. One of them was
Snow piles.
wetland mitigation plans, notes, and plant lists and details prepared by REMA shall be incorporated into the final plans. I think that George Logan had made an argument that it's better not to incorporate them into the final plans because then it's less likely that a contractor will take his plan set and say, I've got this. So I guess the question for the commission is, do you have a preference? Historically, you have required that it be incorporated into the plan set. Would you like to see all of that information incorporated into the plan set? Or are you satisfied with it being part of the record and part of what is being considered, as part of what would be reviewed and possibly approved?
This is Commissioner Gopowski. I said it should be part of the plans because if it was part of the record, it should be part of the plans as well. And because if it's not part of the plans, they could say, whoops, we forgot. I mean, Mr. Logan is very
Jamie
capable.
Frederick in the wetland agent. If it wasn't part of the plan set, it definitely would be referenced in the conditions as part of the, the requirements and the plan to be implemented, because it is still a plan. I'm not saying I don't think it should be part of the plan set. I'm just trying to explain the rationale for those that may not recall as to why it wasn't provided in the plan set to begin with. But I know that the applicant has indicated that they certainly could do that, so I don't foresee it being an issue or pushback point. I just want to know if that's something the commission would want to move forward with in the list of potential conditions for consideration, should the commission decide to move forward with a permit.
This is Commissioner Boswell. I don't see any reason to deviate from prior practice. This is a long-term project. Things are not going to go 100% the way we planned. Having it in an easily recognizable document without having to refer to multiple documents, I think is better.
And then another one that that CLA had was the stockpile location for wetland soils should be shown on the plans. Pretty straightforward. Two other questions I had for the commission in regards to potential site plan modifications. There was discussion about the fact that the CDS hydrodynamic separator could achieve the 90% greater total suspended solid removal as represented in Exhibit 35, rather than the 80% represented in Exhibit 3E. So I would suggest the site plan should be revised to specify the appropriate screen size to achieve that. Right now it says TBD. And then the other one is in regards to phase 1 clearing limit. And I don't know if this is a significant point or not, but I'll just point it out and we can move on or whatever the commission feels is appropriate. But the red line here is the limits of the erosion controls, and the purple line is the limits of clearing. If you follow the existing tree line, I think
Jamie,
that's why.
there's nothing on the screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So the red line is the limits of clearing, or no, sorry, the red line is the erosion control measures, sediment erosion control measures, and this faint purple line is the clearing limit. I think the reason why they put the clearing limit where they did is based on the existing vegetation line, which is this dark kind of bumpy line. I was concerned about the fact that the clearing limit extends into the wetland area before they're doing the proposed activity in the wetland area. And would suggest that the clearing limit should potentially be modified to follow the erosion controls on the southern extent of the phase 1 site plan. But at the same time, I guess the thought process is that this area is already kind of cleared. Is that a concern the commission has, or are you okay with it the way the site plan is drawn up?
Commissioner Begman, Jamie, is that the same area where the violation? That is what you're talking about?
No,
No?
this is,
Oh,
this
okay.
would be at the lower end of the basin.
Yeah.
So where the staging area for equipment is, that's approximately where the basin is proposed. The temporary impact from the violation is to the
Okay.
southern extent of the northern wetland.
Commissioner
As I
Begman.
recall, there was like autumn olive down in this area, so the things they're removing probably aren't, I just wouldn't want to see any ground disturbance beyond the erosion controls. That would be my biggest concern.
What's your recommendation, Jamie?
So I guess the recommendation is either leave it as is or modify the clearing limits on the southern extent of phase one to align with the sediment and erosion controls where the call out for double row typical is indicated.
And why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah.
Sounds like I should write up some language. Okay.
Okay, this is Commissioner Boda. I'm signing out.
Thank you.
All right.
Is that in on your punch list of items, Jamie?
Not particular.
This is Commissioner Begman. There was also something in the letter about marking those piles of stuff that's taken out of the wetlands with 4 flags or something. Is that somewhere on the plans?
No, that was, I think, called out as a modification that could be made to the plans.
Okay.
So I think we've kind of gone over roughly a lot of these things. Let me just. Yeah, I think the only other one that I want to mention is, and it's just a quick passive comment. There is a conservation restriction that follows the conservation restriction from the subdivision approval. It's this gray line here, I believe. Here we go. Deed restriction conservation area. Deed restriction. So basically that the conservation restriction language should be provided for review by the inland wetland agent and town council. And then there's a couple of other standard type conditions that I would probably add in regards to general compliance. We already went over the erosion control inspections. And then I think the one other site specific one I've got here that we haven't touched base on is certification from a licensed geotechnical engineering firm monitoring the basin construction shall be submitted. Because I know that was a concern that CLA had in regards to the long-term stabilization of the embankment between the basin and the wetland area.
It's Commissioner Begman. That sounds good. Regarding the size of the stockpiles, is there anything in there that says that if, because we just had that huge stockpile that eroded so badly, Is there anything showing the size of those stockpiles, or that they seem like the number of them seem, I have no idea how to judge how much earth they're moving and needing to stockpile?
Um, we don't have quantities of like material being moved for each phase, if you will. I believe that
Commissioner
there,
Basserman, are the stockpile areas to scale on the plan?
I'd say probably not. Um, so I think the stockpiles, the thing to kind of focus on and potentially highlight as a condition, and I think I actually may have started something on that front, is the temporary stockpile. It doesn't limit the size of the stockpile, but it does indicate that the stockpile shall be ringed with erosion controls, either straw bales or silt fence, and that the max slope shall be 3-to-1. So the stockpile we were looking at was greatly exceeded 3-to-1. And it does say stabilize entire pile with vegetation or cover. Granted, if you read the installation notes, it says cover stockpile with fabric or vegetation as directed. Which leaves it a little bit more open-ended. But I think that slope of the stockpile is significant and something to, if it's highlighted as a condition of approval, it stresses that that's, something that will be looked for in regards to site compliance.
Commissioner Begman, thanks. Sounds good.
This is Commissioner Bass. And Jamie, as a matter of, I don't know, protocol, I guess. Deliberations continue?
Yes.
Okay. Just, we treat this as similar to, public hearing, I guess. Is there any more discussion needed on the deliberations this evening? Do you have enough to, prepare what you thought you'd be preparing for us in February?
I think so, and we can always workshop it.
Right. So at this point, unless other commissioners have something they want to chime in on 240902, we'll look to continue the deliberations at the February, what's the date?
February 13th meeting.
9th?
13th.
February 13th meeting. 13th. It's not a Friday, is it? No.
Nope, regularly scheduled Thursday.
Regularly. Okay. We have 1, 2, 3 enforcement activities. Cease and correct 240701, 1, 5, and 7 Beacon Hill. I assume that we're going to continue that until our February 13th meeting.
That would
Anybody
be my
feel otherwise? I'm sorry?
It'd be my recommendation to continue to the February 13th meeting.
So noted. Cease and correct 240501, 90 Red Hill Road, vegetation removal. I don't see anybody. Well, maybe. Is there anybody on the call for 240501, Jamie?
I'm here.
I believe so.
I'm here, Jamie.
Okay.
I'm here.
All right, let me close out of everything for the last thing and open up the plan that we've received. So just to recap for everyone, There were some mature trees removed. Some piled up woody debris, which has since been removed, and now the commission's looking at the recommended tree planting plan that was prepared by Soil Science and Environmental Services. Jennifer,
No, we're still looking at.
yeah,
who's on the
I'm working
call.
on it. Thank you. So I don't have a whole lot of pictures of this site, unfortunately. It is challenging in the sense that where the trees were removed, it's rocky ledge on a slope. So, as far as replanting, it is not
Challenge.
conducive. So, oh, jeez. All right, so here you can kind of see the piled up woody debris, which has been, for the most part, removed to a satisfactory level. It's been removed. You can see that there was a bit of impact from accessing to remove that material, which will be relevant when we look at the planting plan. And then in the back, you can see some of the other fallen trees. And then you can't really see that it's a rocky slope, but it is. It's not prime planting areas. So Jennifer Bennett went out and took a look at the site, and I'm going to jump down to her recommendations. We can always go back. She has much nicer pictures. So here you can see that it's not ideal for planting and establishing new tree plantings. You can also see that there are some saplings already in play, and at a certain point you want to work with what the existing conditions are, and you don't want to plant something that's going to compete with something that's already there. So this is again the kind of where the access trail was, and essentially really jump down to the plan. So the shrub, she's proposing some shrub plantings along that access trail and tree plantings more in the opened areas to the rear where the trees were removed. Jump to the according to the town, no machinery will be allowed during the planting installation process. Since all work will be done by hand, the size of trees is limited. The trees should be 4 to 6 feet in height unless otherwise specified. Shrubs should be 24 to 36 inches in height unless otherwise specified. Recommended trees and shrubs tolerate various soil moisture regimes and full partial sun shade conditions. Landowner will likely need to provide irrigation for the plantings depending on precipitation. And then she goes into maintenance a bit. Since the tree and shrub plantings will be small, maintenance such as cutting back volunteer vegetation from around planted areas and shrubs may be necessary until plantings can compete with volunteer species and are not overtopped and shaded. Also, it will be necessary for the property owner or their landscaper to periodically maintain the planting area by removing invasive species, example wineberry, that volunteer into the area so that they do not outcompete and overgrow the newly planted shrubs and trees. The owner/landscaper should conduct inspections during the early and late growing season, and any observed invasive species should be hand pulled out from around the plantings.
And this Commissioner Basserman, Jamie, you're in sync with this, or do you
Yeah,
have
I'm
additions to this? Or?
I'm trying to recall where it says about the number of plantings and the species. This is what I get for trying to do it concisely. Sugar maple saplings and tulip seedlings is what she observed. Okay. Generally, we recommend utilizing the same native non-invasive species that currently exist. So recommend native non-invasive tree plantings, red maple, sugar maple, and yellow birch for a total of 3 to 5 tree plantings. Since the recommended tree spacing are large growing and planting spacing is generally recommended to be 30 to 50 feet apart to maintain the health of the trees as they mature. And then they're also recommending 6 shrub plantings, combination of witch hazel and maple leaf viburnum. So I think given the challenges of planting, it seems reasonable. I would like to see the 5 tree plantings if possible, because it was a pretty large area that was impacted. But like I said, there are a lot of volunteer trees out there already, so it might be, to be field verified at closer to the time of planting. And I think given that it's less trees being planted than what was removed, and that of course all of the trees being planted and volunteering are of smaller stature, that the invasive monitoring and management is important. So I'd probably suggest that I think the planting plan is appropriate with monitoring for 5 years. And if you wanted to, you could do monitoring of 5 years, potentially reduced to 3 if they're successful for those 3 years of monitoring. That's my thoughts on it. Any questions from the applicant or from the commissioners?
Jamie,
That is Commissioner Bassler. That seems to be our normal approach on something like this. 5 at the outset, 3 if things materialize as we hope.
The initial
In
order
terms
did
of the monitoring.
require 1-for-1 planting. But I have to admit, right from the get-go, I didn't really think that was very feasible given the site conditions.
Yeah.
So it's one thing when 2 trees decide to grow kind of concurrent to each other. When you plant them and try and get that effect, it doesn't generally work.
This is Commissioner Begeman. If it were 1-to-1, how many trees would have to be planted?
Honestly, I'm not sure.
More than 5?
More than 5.
I would go with the 5.
This is a show cause hearing. I don't want to cut off the commissioners, but does the commission want to see if the owner has any questions or things to add to what's been said?
Jamie and commissioners, it's Chris Parrish. I don't have anything to add. I'm just here to get this resolved and move on. If you want to work on the 5 trees, I'm glad to make that happen. I'm glad to have Jamie come out near planting time and, evaluate what's currently growing and make final recommendations at that time as well.
This is Commissioner Bassler. A question. How large is the area, Jamie, that the plantings would occur?
Good question.
I guess what I was looking to get at is if it required irrigation, how does that happen?
I don't think it'd be irrigation so much as or I would foresee watering bags. Probably be the easiest.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay.
Or either that, or I don't know.
Distance from
A long hose, maybe that can go down.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. That's a long stretch.
I think that the use of mulch to help hold what moisture, does get to the area naturally is beneficial. And then watering bags, they could be carried. Obviously, they get quite heavy and cumbersome. The property owner could potentially daisy chain some hoses to get
Mhm.
out there. Let me. Is everyone seeing this aerial?
No, oh, now we are.
Okay. So you can kind of see where the clearing of the trees was in the proximity to the house. So you put, I don't know, 100-foot hose might do it, or you might,
Got it. Okay.
might need a little bit more than that. I don't know.
So we're going with 5 trees and monitoring.
5 trees in the shrubs.
Mhm.
So again, this is a cease and correct order. It is a show cause hearing. Now that the plan has been submitted, does the commission want to make a decision regarding the cease and correct order? Typically, what the commission does once you have a plan that you feel resolves the order is you leave the order in place until that plan has been implemented. So you would uphold and modify in this case, likely to approve the plan dated January 10th, 2025, with the stipulation that 5 trees shall be planted, and that monitoring shall occur for 5 years, possibly reduced to 3 if the first 3 years demonstrate success in invasive management and maintenance of the plantings.
Do you need a motion for that?
Yes. And then I guess the question is, do you want the monitoring to be done by a wetland professional / soil scientist / botanist? Landscape professional? Do you have specifics on who you want to be doing that monitoring? Or
Do we have a pattern that we use for a homeowner? Do we lean toward landscape professionals, or do we go in another direction?
I think that you could say wetland scientist or qualified landscape professional.
Landscape.
Experience in invasive species management or something, because we want somebody that will know wineberry versus blackberry, right?
Mhm. Right. All right, I guess I'll take a crack at this. Let's see, regarding cease and correct 240501, cease and correct. Look to uphold and modify the cease and correct order, given the fact that a plan January 10th of 2025 was provided to the commission. The commission has reviewed that plan and has agreed that 5 trees and the appropriate shrubs shall be part and parcel of what is implemented to correct the violation, and that it be monitored for a period of 5 years, could be reduced to 3 years if reliability numbers are achieved, and that a certified landscape professional or soil scientist would be charged with doing the monitoring during that period.
This is Commissioner Begman, friendly amendment that there'd also be invasive plant management.
Perfectly acceptable.
Commissioner Begman, second the motion.
Okay. Any further discussion?
This is Commissioner Ormrod.
Commissioner,
If I could, I would love to see a soil scientist or qualified landscape professional conduct the installation of the plantings. I think that's gonna set the set up for success here, Mr. Parrish. So I would like to see that, the plants be installed properly. That way they have a better chance of success during the monitoring period.
I was going to have Van Wilgens do the planting, but you're suggesting something else?
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent, there's a motion on the table, so it's not really open for conversation at the moment, but so, I mean, I think that qualifies as a landscape professional, perhaps.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Arnold. Yeah, that's fine. That qualifies in my mind. Thank you.
So the friendly amendment, Commissioner Armrod, would be that the professional be present at the installation, not just the monitoring.
Correct.
Yep. That works.
Begavan, do you accept the amendment?
I do.
Oh, Commissioner Begamon accepts the amendment.
All right. So we'll take a vote. Commissioner Goklowski,
Commissioner Goklowski, aye.
Commissioner Amrod,
Commissioner Armrod, aye.
Commissioner Papatonis,
Commissioner Papantonis, aye.
Commissioner Beckman,
Commissioner Begamon, aye.
Commissioner Basserman, aye. Okay.
I'll send the owner an update, and if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to go over it with you tomorrow or in the near future.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Final enforcement, it's an NOV, notice of violation for 301 Maple Street, removal of vegetation without a permit. This is a new one, Jamie?
Relatively. So I issued, I believe, the notice of violation in, oh gosh, November maybe. And I gave him a bit of time because I didn't think that the activity was overly egregious or timely of timely concern to the commission, especially given the agenda length of the commission's experiencing. So basically I said, okay, we'll put up erosion controls and submit an application for what it is you want to do. Essentially, they had started to do some site work, which should have had a permit in place prior to being conducted. So I gave them a deadline of December 20th to submit an application. That came and went. I was hoping to have an application today, or not today, for yesterday, so that it'd be for receipt this evening. But as I understand, the surveying crew has been out to the site, but they haven't been able to finish the survey work. They got out there right before the cold snap hit, which has hindered their ability to conduct the site work. But that hopefully there'll be an application submitted for receipt at the next meeting. So I don't know if the commission wants to take any further action on this. We do have the property owner present. If you want to get an update from them, I definitely think that if there's no application for the next meeting, that something should be done to ensure that we get an application. If you want, I can quickly share a aerial image of the property and explain the activity that has occurred. Or if you'd rather save it for the next meeting, I haven't observed any sediment and erosion issues in the areas that I've been concerned about have had controls somewhat installed. They need repairs, but again, with the ground being frozen, they've gotten as far as they can. They did spread straw over areas of ground disturbance to help reduce the migration of sediment. And of course, right now, everything's frozen and covered in snow. So
I think for somebody that's hung in for almost 3 hours, you deserve to get a little airtime. So you want to share the scene first, Jamie?
Maybe, if my computer works. Okay. Oh, actually, there was a question that I wanted to ask the commission too. So, all right, is everyone seeing a GIS map with
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
the 301 Maple
Yep.
Street? It's on the corner of Maple and Swift. There's a water course to the rear or to the east that flows south. So one of the questions asked was, do they have to have the wetland delineated? It's a water course with a steep slope leading down to it. So I think the contours define it. I think it wouldn't be out of line with past practice to waive the wetland delineation. But since we're all here, does the commission feel differently? I can also jump over to the
No.
NOV. I attached some old photos to the NOV from my predecessor. This is what the slope looks like. So, I mean, the edge of the wetland / watercourse is, in my mind, pretty well defined.
Defined.
Just Commissioner Ormond, I had a question. Is Jamie, do you know if there's a floodway or floodplain associated with this watercourse?
There is, and I believe that the property owner has been in correspondence with the engineering department in regards to that and
Okay.
how that relates to any activities on the property.
Yeah, I'm fine with waiving the delineation. I mean, yeah, like you said, it's a very narrow channel, probably man-made. Those look like, I don't know if those are fill slopes up against it, but yeah, I don't think we have a pretty good idea where the line is here.
Yep.
Yeah, and then these are the photos from when I was out there in December. You can see the straw spread on the disturbed areas. Silt fence was installed. It was installed backwards. They're in the process. It's been turned around. It still has to get towed in. It was a heavily overgrown site before. Like if you drove by, you probably didn't notice there was a house there. So.
Okay.
And this silt fence is it's right at the top of that slope. So that's why I said like they should have gotten a permit before they did any of this activity, which is why I'm telling them they need to submit one. But you know, they're trying to do the erosion controls and Mr. Dosty, do you have an update on when the survey and site plan will be ready? We can't hear you.
Mr. Dosty, you have the floor. Going once.
That is hand raised.
You have your hand raised. You have the floor, Mr. Dosty.
You should be able to, you're unmuted, so you should be able to just speak.
We aren't hearing you, sir.
It's possible he doesn't have a microphone installed on his computer and he's not aware of it.
It's indicating he has a microphone, but it might be that it's not picking up the noise.
Or the volume's down.
Yeah, or the volume's down.
this is Commissioner Goklowski. I happen to remember when that home was first built, way back when. And that property was not overgrown. It was pristine, and I mean, when you took the corner on Maple Street, that house stood out. It was, well groomed, well manicured, everything. Is the property owner looking to restore it to its original condition, or because it was severely overgrown? Do you know if that's true, Jamie?
I don't know if that feedback's coming from you, David, or if it's coming from Mr. Dosty. I think we might have to wait until the next meeting to get an update on that. I know that they're trying to restore the property to in what manner. I would defer to them. I would say that the vegetation that was removed, I mean, there were 2 or 3 trees that had fallen kind of on / surrounding the house, which I had met with him about removing. And then subsequent to that, there was some smaller vegetation removed, mostly undergrowth, removed from the rear of the site, and that's when I issued the notice of violation. There were no mature trees removed from the rear of the site.
Well, I guess you'll be in contact with Mr. Dosty regarding next meeting. We need to, get an application, or I guess what's your next step is season, correct?
That would probably be my recommendation, just to make sure that it's noted that the property is currently in violation of the inland wetlands and watercourses regulations.
This Commissioner Begman, is there any reason not to do a cease and correct tonight? Is it the thinking that there's no more work to be done anyhow, and so we don't need a cease and correct? Or
I think it's because of, well, there's 2 things. One, that the logistical one is that you have to have a show cause hearing within 10 days, and we don't have a meeting within 10 days. So we'd have to have a special meeting. And then I think in light of that, the fact that there doesn't appear to be an immediate concern to the wetland and watercourse, and ideally we can still get this resolved through an application process. What we could do is we could require, if the commission wanted, you could direct me to, if we don't have an application by, say, the Friday before our next meeting, which would be February 7th, to issue a cease and correct order at that point. So that way we could then have the show cause hearing at the next meeting.
13th.
Commissioner
And I
Begman,
can
that's
send correspondence confirming that that's what the commission has directed. And they, so they're aware they have until that time to submit the application.
It's a good step forward, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so we said January, the Friday before the meeting.
Right.
there's a comment from Mr. Dosty in the chat.
Thank you, Commissioner Begman.
Sure.
I apologize for not responding, but my application will be in and Nafis and Young will have their paperwork in. I did talk with a representative from Nafis and Young today, and they said they would have an application in before the next meeting and they would try to have it in by that Friday. So that's kind of part of why I picked that Friday.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. No applications for review, no applications for receipt. You had a couple agent approvals.
All of which
Anything noteworthy there?
commission,
I'm sorry?
all of which the commission saw and was okay with doing administratively.
Right. So other than correspondence and announcements, anything else to add, Jamie, into the correspondence and announcements?
Not particularly, just we are kind of starting to get close to the registration timeframe for those two items. So if you're interested in registering for either, please let Katie know. So
Yeah, I think Katie sent out a email February 7th. I think she was
Yeah,
looking to get for the.
I probably won't put these on our next agenda. So this is your kind of last written reminder.
Yes, February 7th,
Yep.
please, is the deadline for the land use law
Land use.
one. It takes finance a good week or so to cut the check and then to mail it out. So I want to make sure that we have ample time to do that and without rushing the finance department. So February 7th, and I do not have a registration date yet for cause, but I will let you know once I get that.
Yeah, I don't know. They have their registration up yet.
Katie, it's Melissa Papantonis. I'm going to do the legal one. I'll send you an email tomorrow.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Katie, me as well.
Thank you. See, reminders are a good thing.
Yeah, they are. Okay.
10 o'clock and signing
I
up for
think-
seminars.
10:06. I'm sure we have things that we'd like to get to. So good night, all.
Good night.
Meeting adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
All right, good night.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.